Hey, happy Saturday, everyone. We're getting ready to jump into a Matt Ehret a live stream discussion in regards to tariffs and their implications. Are they a force for good, force for evil? And it was a great conversation, Matt. When his streams, his chat sessions, he'll answer questions through there. So this live stream is already in progress, and so we're going to jump into it to learn the truth about tariffs. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they bad? Who pays for them? Significant different types of conversation in regards to it. So we're going to jump into the conversation in progress. So appreciate you being here.
The idea that Vladimir Putin's government or any Russian government stop the hostilities without securing essentially those four oblasts in Crimea, I think is fantasy. So how can you do a deal when the president of Ukraine is saying not an inch, not an inch? And furthermore, in February of this year, Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary, went to Brussels, and we've talked about this quite a bit on our program, and told the European vassals of Washington that they had to ratchet up their military spending and increase dramatically the provision of weaponry to Ukraine, which they appear to be doing. Insane levels of military spending are now on the table, 5% of GDP by 2035. And he said, we're going to have a division of labor from now on. You take care of Ukraine, we'll take care of China. And Iran, I think, is part of that equation. And so that's exactly what the Europeans are doing. They don't seem to have any appetite to concede an inch to the Russian government either. So how is Trump going to bring them on board? How is he going to bring the Europeans and Zelensky on board? And does he even have the intention to do that? I'm skeptical that he does. And the last thing I want to say is, we saw in vivid technicolor a few weeks ago that the Trump administration cannot be trusted one iota. And I'm referring, I could give you many reasons for that, but the one that I think is most compelling is they were purporting to engage in negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. And days before they were set to meet to have a further negotiation, Israel, with the consent and support, the active military and intelligence support of the Trump administration, attacked the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was a war of aggression. Whatever you may think of the Iranian government, it was a clear violation of the UN Charter. And afterwards, the Israeli media were openly bragging about the fact that the negotiations over Iran's nuclear program were, as they termed it, a deception operation. They were trying to lull the Iranians into a sense of complacency, so that the war of aggression would be more effective in destabilizing the government of Iran. So this is this is just one of the many reasons why you can't trust the Trump administration. So I personally am deeply skeptical that this is going to lead to a peace agreement. My inclination is always to support negotiation and the resolution of armed conflict by means of negotiation. I hope I'm wrong, Matt, but I just don't see this resulting in any kind of a sustainable peace deal anytime soon. Maybe it'll kickstart a conversation that months down the road will result in a sustainable peace deal. But the idea that that's going to happen imminently, I think, is a fantasy.
Okay, that was a sobering, brief but concise assessment by Dimitry. How are you doing, Marty? I'm glad that you worked out the technical issues.
At long last, good to see you, Matt. Good to see you, Dimitry.
A pleasure. Hey, Matt. Marty, how are you doing? Pleasure.
I'm an honor. Very good to be on with you.
Me too. So, thank you so much.
Martin, we just began with the obvious conversation starter pertaining to the upcoming Trump-Putin summit. There's obviously there's many moving parts going on right now simultaneously. There's developments that I want to touch on pertaining to the soft underbellies, the big news soft underbelly of Eurasia, of the greater Eurasian partnership that is currently being hammered at. Clearly, there are influences in play working to weaken the Russia, Iran, China nexus. There does seem to still be some very toxic ideas militarily pertaining to the war games, the war exercises we saw all throughout July. I think there were 5 or 6 major war games on China's perimeter There's a lot of very, very bad ideas, and Dimitry had just left off on some of the duplicity in supporting or in biding time and playing a certain deflection game to give Israel the chance to expand its basically imperial objectives in the region of not just Gaza but more broadly Lebanon. You know, there's a push to disarm Hezbollah, things like that. These are all very negative things, very, very, very things that would make somebody pretty cynical about where things are going. But at the same time, then you have this meeting that seems, according to Ushakov, involve a meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska, of all places. And apparently, I mean, the way the language is being put out is that a deal in some form that's agreeable to Russia has been met. What that'll look like, I don't know. There's even talk of Zelensky here. I just saw this about an hour ago. NBC News put out White House is considering inviting Zelensky to Alaska. I don't even think that that's true, but maybe. The Europeans, Ursula von der Leyen, there's emergency meetings. Colossus is having an emergency meeting of foreign ministers about what are they going to do faced with this attempt to have a bilateral discussion about somehow resolving the Ukraine issue. Is any of this real? Is this all smokescreen? What do you think, Marty? Where is your mind at?
I think we're a bit better than a smokescreen, but and it depresses me to say this, might bring a smile to you, Dimitry. I fully agree with your assessment, completely endorse it, and I find that depressing, as I'm sure you do yourself. Exactly. And I clearly you're on the same page with both of us too, Matt. There is a contradiction here, and the contradiction is in the mind of the President of the United States, and it's not entirely a bad thing, because this is a president who, on economic policy and on tariffs, whether you love him or loathe him, and in some respects I love him, and in some respects, I especially the failure to even begin to tame the defense budget, which he is clearly not remotely going to do, and his partiality for an evil, incompetent maniac, megalomaniac like Mr. Musk. There are strong negative sides to the president, no question. But there are also positive sides. And it's this, we see this contradiction even more so on the defense side. In a way, this is the natural continuation from Trump 1, from the first Trump administration. There is no new Trump, good or bad. It's the same Trump. And in the first administration, he knew what he wanted to do in the economy, and he did it. And according to his own lights, he was successful. Big downsides, but he knew what he wanted to do. He accomplished it. He's got a background in business in New York. He was always familiar with Wall Street intimately. If you look at his treasury team and his business and finance and commerce team in his first term, he stuck with them. He was consistent. He did not juggle them and keep firing them and renewing them like he did with his secretaries of state and his, most of all, national security advisors. So on defense, he got all his ideas from Fox News, the Fox News channel. They were all lousy ideas. And we see exactly the same thing happening here now. Pete Hegseth is a joke. That's the best thing you can say about him. And he's such a catastrophe and so inept that even in the president's White House and among the MAGA people, he really is not taken seriously. Let him run for governor of Tennessee, and I have enough respect for the people of Tennessee that he will sink without trace there. He's the Republican answer to Kamala Harris. We can be even-handed with the Republicans and Democrats. Bless you, Dimitry. You understand? I can see immediately exactly. Exactly.
I mean, just when Pete Hegseth was asked in Congress to name one member of ASEAN, and he couldn't do it. Although he knew somehow that China is a peer competitor that has to be reined in and stopped at all costs, he couldn't name one ASEAN member. Sorry, I had to throw that out there.
No, that's the point. Exactly. Yeah. I did an analysis on him. We're on a Pluralia dialogue here, and I published an analysis on him when he came into office. I felt a bit guilty afterwards because I was so vicious and scathing about him, as I thought. But of course, I underestimated this level of stupidity totally. It was infinite. There was a British foreign secretary in the 1920s called Arthur Henderson, who became he became the head of the League of Nations afterwards in the 1930s. A sweet, nice man. And Hegseth is certainly not a sweet, nice man. But like Hegseth, a figure of such extraordinary stupidity that you could not credit it. And this is Hegseth. And he was the president's choice. Now, we see this reflected in the ambiguity of dealing with Russia. The president wants peace. For that matter, I think he is sincere in wanting peace in Gaza. But he gets all his ideas from peace from the Israelis and from Fox News. They don't have to buy him, which many people think they have. They're in his head. He accepts it isn't just what he thinks, it's the way he thinks it. All the negative algorithms are there. We have an Israeli prime minister who is now incredibly dangerous because it's not a question of being bad, it's a question of not being rational. I saw this before 40 years ago. I saw this when Menachem Begin was invading Lebanon in 1982. Begin had the idea to bring peace for Israel for 100 years or even 1,000 years. Now, Begin was mad. He was quite literally mad. And he once banned me when in my 20s from when I was working for the Jerusalem Post briefly for writing disrespectful things about him, not even about his policies, though I had been disrespectful. But what got under his skin was when I described him as a frustrated Polish gentleman with dreams of grandeur. He went berserk over that. But with Mr. Netanyahu, it's more dangerous because he's very dignified and apparently rational in public. But when you look at what he actually says, and you look at the people he's surrounded himself with, like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, it's enormously dangerous. He's not looking for to end the killing now. He's not. It's exactly what Dimitry said and what you said, Matt. We're looking at a solution that will last 1,000 years. Woodrow Wilson tried that. Neville Chamberlain did that. In his own evil way, Adolf Hitler tried that. Lenin tried that. What happens when anyone tries that? Hecatombs of dead, catastrophes every time. Winston Churchill was actually an inept bungler that destroyed entire nations over half a century and was never called to account for it, for any of his endless bungles. Even through World War II, we had a good outcome because the British War Cabinet and the British top General Sir Alan Brooke, and most of all the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, reined him in. But now, up to now at least, President Trump has not recognized that about Netanyahu. But I think your point, Matt, and yours, Dimitry, are completely correct. The president genuinely wants peace. He wants a constructive outcome on Ukraine. He wants to end the killing. He wants to maintain a good relationship and a constructive dialogue, which is not selling out to the Russians, but a constructive interrelationship, which we need for the survival of the world. Between Russia and the United States. All this is responsible, it is admirable, but he doesn't know how to go about it. I think the same is true of Secretary Rubio, who in many respects I think he's certainly a vast improvement on the awful evil clowns and nonentities we had under Biden.
Well, so you're putting forth a slightly more positive evaluation
but the
on.
Point is, Dimitri is completely right. There are, and so are you. These evil forces are there. Those war games are being held. And so far, we've been focusing, as you said, on the soft underbelly of Eurasia, Matt, and on Israel and the Middle East. And these are both very alarming areas as far as US and NATO policies are concerned. But also, don't forget Ukraine. Ukraine is not over yet. And the British do not want Ukraine to be over. The British have signed a deal with Ukraine, and the Ukrainians, quite correctly, in my opinion, leaked the details of it. And the details are extraordinary, and nobody ever talks about this. Under the terms of a 100-year treaty, 100 years again, 100-year treaty, Britain, in return for giving Ukraine everything it wants and needs and protecting Ukraine and being Ukraine's big buddy and guiding spirit, like British Empire days, will have exactly the same control over the economy and customs and imports and exports and taxes and finances of Ukraine that the British had over China for 100 years, from the Opium Wars all the way through to 1943 when Franklin Roosevelt forced them to give it up. And that's incredible. It's neo-enslavement. It's neo-colonialism. It is an abomination. And it's absurd because not only the Russians, but even the Europeans and certainly the Chinese and the Ukrainian people themselves, nobody will let it happen. But they're trying it. They're serious about it. They think it's their way out of the economic collapse that Britain is in because they were so stupid to leave the European Union. It's not what's wrong with the European Union. I'm a huge critic of the EU the way it is now. I think, Dimitry, you and I would have a very good time weighing into the EU together. Once again, I have no, from being familiar with your work, I have no doubt I would happily endorse everything you say, and hopefully would produce more amused smiles from your face like now. But having said that, from the British perspective, to isolate themselves by leaving a market of 450 to 500 million people and imagining that they're still the economic superpower and world empire they were 150 years ago is insanely stupid.
Well, that brings up a question that I have.
So that's why they feel they have to enslave Ukraine. The city of London is serious about this.
So Dimitry, I mean, Marty's bringing up the City of London issue. I know that there was a meeting. I don't know if it's still happening or if it just happened, but there's a meeting that was announced which will involve representatives from the USA, from Ukraine, from Europe in London, specifically to deal with and to perhaps mitigate or create a strategy for the outcome, whatever that outcome will be after the Putin-Trump summit happens on the 15th in Alaska. The paradox in my mind, well, number one, Marty says that the British are instigating sabotage. They're a nefarious operator. But then, at the other hand, lending to your point that the U.S. might be duplicitous, the U.S. is involved somehow in this meeting. Oh, yeah. Why would they be brought in to a meeting that is going to mitigate the damage caused, or at least the undesirable effects caused by a possible discussion between Putin and Trump? And do you see anything else as far as the like what is it? Because I'm really trying to get a sense, like, what is it specifically? And I know there's things we can't know. We're not part of these back channel discussions and negotiations and whatever. But like, what could the U.S. possibly offer? And we already made a point that territorial exchanges is very unlikely. Russia has no reason to give up its any of its territories that it has acquired in Ukraine. There's obviously security agreements, like there's security guarantees that Russia desperately wants, but does the U.S. have the power at the moment to enforce those? I mean, if anything, I'm seeing Ryabkov make a point. He just made a statement publicly saying that U.S. missile systems have been appearing more and more frequently in regions where this directly impacts the security of Russia, the Russian Federation. There's like 2 nuclear missile carrying submarines deployed into a region much more closely. I mean, that threatens Russia by the USA just a few days ago. So what sort of influence do you think that the UK intelligence might have in trying to organize a disruption of anything good? Number 2, do you think anything good is even possible? And I guess the question I'm asking here is, in what way might the U.S. create some positive outcome, or is there no positive outcome in your mind possible? And this is all deflection, and they really just simply want to try to break up the Russia-China alliance by seducing Russia and getting it to somehow agree to terms that will be unfavorable to China or Iran or other countries near Russia. What do you think, Dimitry? I'm sorry for that. It's a discombobulated question, but there's a lot of things that are I'm trying to get in my mind at the same time. It's tough to put it into words right now.
Well, if people are acting in good faith, they are, agents of goodwill. Anything's possible. We could end this war in a heartbeat, and we could do it in a way that is sustainable and maximally just. No one's going to be perfectly satisfied, and Ukraine could rise from the ashes. It would take many years, given the devastation in the country. But the problem here is that we're not dealing with people on the Western side who are actors of good faith and goodwill. I want to just comment on something that Marty said about Trump. I do agree we're dealing with the same Trump that we were dealing with in the first administration, although there are signs that this one is intellectually diminished to some degree, which is not surprising because of his advanced age. But that, that doesn't mean that his fundamental values have changed. I think they are the same. And I've said many times, you are what your record says you are. And I think it behooves us to just briefly recall what Trump's record was under in his first administration. In his first administration, he was the first U.S. president to provide lethal weaponry to Ukraine. Yes. Not even Obama was willing to do that, although his administration helped to orchestrate it. Yes. He withdrew the United States from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was a tremendously provocative move. He ordered the assassination of the top Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, taking out also significant representatives of the government in Iraq. He recognized, in violation of international law, Israel's annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights. He moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, violating the international consensus that East Jerusalem was reserved for the capital of a future Palestinian state. I could go on and on. I do not believe that Trump's natural inclinations are towards peace. I don't think at the same time, and I make the mistake of myself, Marty, of sometimes asking the question, does he want war? Does he want peace? I think the real question we should ask ourselves is, on what terms would he be prepared to accept peace, right? And fundamentally, I think these are hegemonic terms. He wants the American to remain, he wants the United States to remain a global hegemon, not just a regional or a hemispheric hegemon. He wants it to remain a global hegemon, and he will happily sign on to any peace deal that preserves that status. But he's now operating in a new world, and neither he nor the people he surrounded himself with are willing to accept that American hegemony. So this is the fundamental problem we confront. As far as the UK's role, I think the UK is and always has been. There's a lot of tendency on the part of those of us who are hoping for the best from the second Trump administration to attribute too much agency to the European vassals, as I like to call them. I'm sure, Marty, you share that assessment. I think at the end of the day, Sir Keir is probably going to do what the Donald wants him to do, as will Macron, and Merz, and the clown that we have as prime minister here in Greece, this pathetic Mitsotakis character, and so forth. So the fundamental problem is that Trump is not actually prepared to accept that the United States is just one player at the table, a very, very important one. But there are now others that need to be dealt with as sovereign partners, people equally deserving of their respect, not just Russia and China, but a whole host of nations. And he's not prepared to accept that. So ultimately, what we're going to find, I fear, is a collapse in these negotiations, an intensification of the economic and military warfare. What's really intriguing to me, and maybe Marty, you have some insight into this, or Matthew, is why has Vladimir Putin agreed to this meeting? The Ushakov statement, I don't speak Russian, so I'm not exactly sure whether the translation we're getting of Ushakov's comments is perfectly accurate, but I'm having trouble accepting that the United States government actually put an acceptable offer on the table. This could be just posturing on the part of the Russian Federation. They want to demonstrate that they are willing to engage in discussions. I completely commend them and the Trump administration for continuing the conversation. Maybe that's all this is. But I just can't believe that there's a truly acceptable offer on the table.
Yeah. Well, there was a discussion, I mean, in Trump's first term, towards the very end, and I think we're going to be doing an entire show on this in the coming weeks ahead, depending on the outcome of what happens, if anything happens at all, pertaining to Arctic development. And I know there was something called the, an executive order for the Alaska to Canada Railway, which Trump passed as an executive order to connect rail lines from the lower 48 through Alberta into Alaska, which had on its website a big focus on Eurasian trade as being an economic driver for that. And I'm just wondering, I know that Putin first put out the offer in 2007 for the United States to join. This is George Bush's United States, so he obviously didn't get any traction to build the Bering Strait tunnel. That was 2007. And they offered to pay like $65 billion to continue that tunnel. That it's been an idea for a long time, never came close to reality. And then it was reoffered under Obama in 2011. Again, it was rejected. It seems like that idea of Arctic development, or the Arctic as a platform for cooperation and economic development instead of war, which is, we know that there are certain figures within Space Force, certain jarheads that look to the Arctic, and they're looking at long-range missiles, full spectrum dominance to prepare for the oncoming war with Russia and China. But do you think that this idea for reviving that type of rail strategy for the Arctic in tandem with Russia is possible? Or do you think that that was just a pipe dream, Marty?
It should be possible. I'm all in favor of it for all the constructive reasons that you and Dimitry have both put out, Matt. But it will not be allowed to happen for the reasons that both you and Dimitry have put so well, because the forces of hostility, the forces of bigotry, the entrenched forces, these people are so caught up in their mind that they must, quote unquote, deal with, meaning disintegrate Russia and destabilize China. This goes so deeply with them. It is the way they look at the world. They still believe the noxious nonsense that Francis Fukuyama came out with 30 years ago, that history ended with the collapse of communism, and that the future of the world is liberal democracy as defined by the United States and its surrogates in Western Europe. And this must be imposed on everybody, first in Eastern Europe, then on disintegrating Russia, then on China. These people, both in the Democratic and Republican Party, virtually wall to wall in the Congress. There's a new generation coming up in America, and we now see it finally breaking through in the Democratic Party with people like AOC and Mr. Mamdani in New York, and the political upheaval in Minneapolis. And it can't come a moment too soon. And Trump was actually the expression of this insofar as he was or could be in the Republican Party. But as Dimitry rightly said, it's an atavistic view. Even when I think your summary here, Dimitry, again, I've got nothing to add to it. I fully agree with it entirely. Again, your analysis, maybe we're both totally wrong, but for better or worse, I again endorse it, and I agree with you 100%. And one of the points we see is here, at a conscious level, yes, the president wants peace, but he has no conception of how to get it. He has no conception of diplomacy, and he has no staff work. All his staffers, he surrounds himself. There are one or two slightly better people. Mr. Witkoff, at least, he's a strong Zionist, very strong supporter of Israel, but also a pragmatic businessman from New York. And he is the nearest, he's a long way from understanding the Arab world or the Russian world, a long way. But he is the nearest thing we have to a moderate or a pragmatist or a sensible person. Still, I would say quite a long way, but he's the best we have in this administration. Mr. Rubio, I think, is like the president, means well, but he's always been a neocon. His vision has always been Russia on our side against China. That's always been Rubio's vision. These people are so superficial. If you read them out to any member of the United States, 4042, people even from the isolationist Burton K. Wheeler to Harry Truman would all have despised these people as idiots and clowns. Now, all these people have multiple degrees. Harry Truman left school as a teenager and had to sit behind a farting mule on his father's farm for 10 years. But he'd been a captain in the United States Army, commanding an artillery battalion in World War I. And he had, with all his limitations, he was infinitely superior, and so was his generation, to the people we're talking about here now. They're incapable of making the wound. Arthur Vandenberg went from being a total isolationist to a supporter of the Marshall Plan in the mid-1940s, the arch-Republican isolationist conservative senator from the heartland. There are several members in the Senate now, not many, of course, but there's a handful who have either made that transition or are capable of doing so. But at least 90 of the 100 of them are incapable of doing that right now. And if you look at the staffs in the National Security Council, the State Department, and most of all the Department of Defense, none of them think in these terms. They all think in simplistic MAGA terms. So they really think they're still going to be not just number one, but hyperpower number one. The president still thinks this. And this is the fundamental flaw. I mean, he really wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He really wants to stop the killing. In that sense, he's in the line of naive American leaders going back more than 100 years. Oh, if only we could all get on together. Remember, a Republican Secretary of State, Frank Kellogg, outlawed war in 1928, won a Nobel Peace Prize for doing it in the Kellogg-Briand Peace Pact. The poor fool thought that was all that was needed. And this wasn't a Democrat, liberal, idealistic Secretary of State. It was a supposedly hard-nosed, big business, free market, tough, ruthless Republican Secretary of State. But they all thought all we have to do is wave our American hyperpower magic wand, and that, along with the fact that we have won the war of ideas, that Hegel is dead, which he isn't, and they think the future is on their side. They do not realize that they're the ones who are dead, and that the Hegelian model still works. As with Napoleon, as with Hitler, as with Philip II of Spain 450 years ago, American dominance has become so great that it provoked a far greater counter-reaction, not just in Russia, but in China, in Iran, in India, all around the world. And by the way, they're certainly working flat out to try and detach India from the BRICS and turn India against China. But it's not going to succeed because first, the Indians are not fools. The Indians have their own fears of China and rivalry with China. It's very fundamental because it's a competition for scarce resources between two gigantic emerging global powers, each with around 1.3 to 1.4 billion people. So conflict competition is inevitable, but it can be, up to now, it has been managed. But it is competition, at least, is inevitable. The Americans too know this. But every time the Americans overplay their hand, their hostility towards Russia and China is obvious. So Russia and China are together more than ever. But the Indians are no fools. And people forget that the India-Iran relationship is very fundamental and is more fundamental to India than the Iran relationship is to either Russia or China, because India is so dependent on Iran for its oil and natural gas and resources. And there is a very strong relationship that has prospered under, it's bipartisan in India. You find it under the Congress Party, and you find it under the BJP, which has been in power for many years now. And it's not going to change. And also, the Indians fear America will try and detach Kashmir from them, waving the claim of democracy in order to establish themselves again, the old dream in Central Asia. And the Indians are not fools, and they recognize this. Americans think they're fools. The Americans think they're fools, but the Americans are the fools. They're fooling themselves. So yes, these efforts will continue, and there cannot be a fundamental, unfortunately, settlement here. But President Putin wants to avoid a world war, which isn't to say he won't go into one. Putin is a counterpuncher. He's repeatedly shown there are red lines he will not cross. And if you push him too far, as in Chechnya, as in Ukraine, as in Moldova, he does not initiate hostilities, but he reacts with overwhelming force when he and the Russian military and political consensus believe they have been driven to the wall and they have no choice, which is a very dangerous situation. So Trump's action, I mean, you are right.
Marty, can I ask, jump in here quickly?
Oh yes, of course.
Because you've raised a lot of points.
Sorry.
And just to throw it out, just to keep the dialogue going a bit. There's you raised the issue of the attempts to split off India from its multipolar allies. Dimitri's made the point that the desire for peace is there, but sometimes, but when somebody says, like a Rubio says, multipolar, it may not mean the same thing as when a Xi Jinping says the word multipolar, though it's the same word. It seems, there does seem to be a revival of a certain Pax Americana idea of a certain concept that we can have peace as long as everybody pays fealty to the hegemon. That type of toxicity. I'm not saying that Trump necessarily believes that, but I'm saying that is a very prevalent, loud ideology that's still shaping U.S. policy. And then you get the question of in what way, what strategies or tactics can they deploy to try to bring about this type of more negative outcome, or dismantle or undermine the better idea of what the BRICS represents for humanity. And one thing that I noticed, and Dimitry, you sent me a little image that pertains to something I'd like to get your thoughts on, of the Zangezur corridor. There it is right there. That's the image that you sent me of the Zangezur corridor, this 43-kilometer bridge connecting Azerbaijan's its little enclave through Armenia, which is part of, there's been a remix of a negotiation around a peace deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And this corridor is now apparently going to be under the control of a private consortium run by certain powers inside of the United States. Certain U.S. mercenaries will be permitted to be stationed there, apparently, and it's like a 100-year deal. This is something which probably is connected to what we're hearing in Alaska, because we had Aliyev and Pashinyan, who were just meeting in Washington with Trump. Aliyev even said that Trump should win the Nobel Prize for negotiating the outcome. But it doesn't seem to be very compatible with the idea of the type of multipolar cooperation in a positive way that we've seen so far. So, Dimitry, if you're able to, could you give me your thoughts? Do you think that this is connected to what we are seeing being announced for the meeting between Trump and Putin? Is what's also being discussed in Azerbaijan and Armenia with the Zangezur?
I don't believe in events. I don't believe in the concept of coincidence when we're talking about geopolitical events such as this. The timing is just far too suspicious, and I suspect that this announcement is being made. There are a number of possible interpretations. Again, we don't have insight into exactly what's going on here. It could be that this agreement was done somehow in consultation with the Russian government, and the Russian government was given some kind of assurances or concessions that we don't know about, and that, in consideration of those concessions, Vladimir Putin agreed to meet with Trump. That's one possibility. Another is that Russia was completely cut out of these discussions, and this was announced at this particular moment so that Trump would head into these negotiations with more leverage, because this is obviously of concern to the Russian Federation. They don't want, American forces, American mercenaries, CIA agents, American corporations being smack dab there between the Islamic Republic and Russia in this key corridor. So I don't know, but I don't believe the timing is coincidental. Somehow, some way they're related, and hopefully we'll soon figure that out. But in any event, this is not good at all for the region. Absolutely not. It's very interesting to look at the statements that have come out of the Russian Federation and the Islamic Republic in light of this news. The Islamic Republic has said flat out, we will not allow this to happen. And completely understandably, in light of what has just transpired, with this war of aggression that Israel and the United States jointly waged on the Islamic Republic, and all the other things, the assassination of Soleimani, nuclear scientists being murdered over years and so forth, it's entirely understandable that the Iranians would be extremely hostile to the idea of the Americans controlling this corridor right on the northern border. It didn't appear in that map you showed or the one I sent you, but Tehran, the capital, is actually quite close to the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. But in any event, this area that south of the border on the Iranian side there are ethnic Azerbaijanis, and I'm sure that the Azerbaijani government covets that region, and so for that reason as well, it's not just the proximity of Tehran, it's not just the hostility the Americans have shown to the Iranians for decades. It's also the fact that there's a potential problem of separatism arising here. There's a whole bunch of reasons why Iran is intensely hostile, and they just come flat out and said they're not going to allow it to happen. And they said, well, we won't allow it to happen with or without the Russians. That was quite interesting. But then you look at the Russian side, it's much more constrained. They said, we favor the resolution of this conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but the solution should be one that is formulated by regional players, and everybody else, I'm paraphrasing, basically should butt out. I think the restraint is partly a function of the fact that the Russians are about to head into this negotiation with Trump, and so they're trying not to sound too bellicose. The Iranians, on the other hand, don't feel that kind of constraint, so they're just coming straight out and saying, we're not going to allow this to happen. How they're going to stop it is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Are they actually going to use military force? I don't know, but they were adamant that they won't. At the end of the day, one thing is for sure: this is not going to promote peace in the region. Absolutely not. Sticking American mercenaries, forces, surveillance security facilities there, American corporations under the control of the Trump administration or any U.S. administration, whether somebody like Kamala Harris, whoever it may be, is going to destabilize the region and dramatically increase the prospects of military conflict involving a host of potential players: Azerbaijan, Armenia, the Turks, the Russian Federation, the Islamic Republic. This is just a prescription for war and instability and disaster, in my view. And I'm quite surprised that the Armenian government went along with it. And if you look at the polls in Armenia in recent months, this is a man without a democratic mandate at this particular moment.
Yes.
He's in serious trouble. There's I think an election coming up in 2026. The one thing he has going for him is that his opponents are even less popular than he is, apparently. But I don't know how long this deal is going to hold together, and just how much of a really a concrete, finalized deal it actually is. Trump has, as we all know, a tendency to, advertise successful outcomes in negotiations when in fact there hasn't been any agreement struck at all. So
exactly,
I just don't see this as good news at all for the region, for anybody in the region.
Well, I had a lot of hope in 2018 when Armenia was playing a big role in the Eurasian Economic Union, which integrated with the Belt and Road Initiative pretty quick. They had just signed their first treaty in 2015, and then you had Pashinyan.
Pashinyan, I believe.
Yeah.
Pashinyan. Yeah.
Thank you. Inserted into power, and immediately a different type of paradigm and policy that was much more Western leaning began to be presented. And I'm wondering, and then Azerbaijan, Aliyev for a while was acting somewhat reasonably, even acting in a very favorable direction towards the north-south transportation corridor. For those who don't know, who might be watching online, I know you guys know, but the corridor was announced in 2002, specifically between Russia, Iran, and India. But it involved over time something like 13 or 14 countries that signed on to participate in this it's a very synergistic project to the Belt and Road Initiative, multimodal, and obviously Azerbaijan, Georgia play a very big role in a lot of this. Is there anything now we're seeing a complete 180? There's now this is what I see being very, very threatened. The survival of this, a lot of disturbances as well, destabilizations in an area that China definitely needs with Iran to have the middle corridor survive and thrive as far as the Belt and Road Initiative. Is there anything within Azerbaijan or Armenia right now which echoes a possible healthier return to sanity, or do you guys see, maybe Marty, I'll ask you, do you see not a lot of hope that there are reasonable forces in play in these regions?
Unfortunately, again, it's an honor to agree with you, Dimitry, but I find it so exactly, you understand immediately. We are in full agreement on everything, and that makes things more depressing than ever because our analysis is exactly. No, I don't. I come from Northern Ireland myself, and it's a much smaller and more containable conflict than for example, the Israelis and the Palestinians, or so many of the conflicts in Europe. But it still went on virtually forever. And the smaller the conflict, the more localized the conflict, often the more intense it becomes. The two players, especially when they're small and tiny, become obsessed with each other as the embodiment of virtue, the embodiment of evil. They can't see anything beyond it. They dig themselves further into holes. 35 years ago, I was traveling extensively around the Caucasus, And I was covering 750,000 Azeri refugees in those days. In those days, the Armenians seemed to be the bad guys. Of course, the Azeris flipped over to the other side long afterwards. And again, the Americans don't understand what they're in. First of all, there is this so many American fantasies. One of them being that they could break up Iran and splinter it. That the Azeri population that you mentioned, Matthew, you discussed in Iran, will turn on the Iranian majority with outrage, what have you. It didn't happen. The time when they thought they were going to split it apart was with the Israeli air attacks, and instead it brought more, like the German blitz over Britain in World War II, or for that matter, the British much more destructive bombing of Nazi Germany in World War II, it created more social cohesion. It brought people together. It had the counter effect that they expected it to have. The Azeris are not turning on the Iranians. That's the first point. The second point is in Armenia, as you say, you have this very unrepresentative and unstable government. It's going nowhere. And they have nowhere to go, they imagine, except more confrontation with the other side. It's like Netanyahu. The only way Netanyahu can stay in power in Israel is if there is war in Gaza and war against Hezbollah and war against everyone. As soon as peace comes, the issue of his own corruption comes up, investigations come up, his own culpable liability in leaving Western Israel defenseless for the Hamas attacks and atrocities of October 7, 2023 will be brought up by popular outrage. He can never let that happen. So in these different countries, weak, discredited, corrupt, incompetent governments must have more war, must have more confrontation. It is the only way they stay in power. It is their vested interest to stay in power. The one other thing I will add is we keep coming back to these mercenaries. Now, this goes back hundreds of years, certainly to the Middle Ages. It's the reason why the great state of Burgundy disintegrated in the Middle Ages. When any country depends on mercenaries, as even the Nazis did in their assault on the Soviet Union in World War II, it falls apart. Mercenaries are capable of any outrage you like. They have no conscience.
Sure.
They won't take heavy casualties. They fall apart when they do. In order to minimize Russian conscript casualties, the Russian leadership encouraged the Wagner Group in the earlier stages of the Ukraine war. But then the Wagner Group turned into a Frankenstein monster out of the control of the Russian government and had to be defused. The Americans, ever since Dick Cheney, ever since Iraq, have embraced on a colossal scale, far more than the Russians did or dreamed of doing, the idea of using mercenaries to do their dirty work. But mercenaries don't take casualties. They outrage populations much more quickly than regular armies do. They're not subject to regular army discipline. They run out of control. They create huge popular reactions against them. And most of all, when significant popular uprising comes, and we saw this in Afghanistan too, and in Iraq, the so-called security consultants, all these wonderful little mercenary groups that will perform miracles for you, crack and disintegrate and fall apart. And this is inevitably going to happen in the corridor as well, between Iran and Armenia. The Americans have backed the wrong horse yet again. They're very consistent in doing that.
Would you agree with that, Dimitry?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We're just dealing with a stunning level of incompetence. The last time I recall the United States government having, whatever my thoughts may have been about the overall agenda, the administration of George H.W. Bush. Remember Baker, the Secretary of State? This man actually understood statesmanship.
Yes.
The elder Bush understood statesmanship. Even Ronald Reagan, was able to negotiate monumentally important nuclear disarmament treaties. But it's been all downhill ever since then. And with each successive administration, the level of incompetence and ignorance, the outright ignorance of these people is astonishing. In such circumstances, backing the wrong horse is almost an inevitability. And so I don't want to sound so pessimistic. At the end of the day, I will say this, as terrible as this all sounds, I actually continue to have a tremendous amount of, I'm not going to call it optimistic because I don't consider myself an optimist. I consider myself a realist.
Same here. Yeah.
But I believe in the innate ability of human beings to overcome adversity and ultimately to do the right thing. And I think we're seeing today, for example, in regard to what is happening in West Asia,
Yes.
a great awakening across the world, including in the West. And inevitably this will, assuming we don't render ourselves extinct in the interim, and that, somebody doesn't resort to the nuclear option, if we can avoid that outcome, I do believe that in the long run, we will emerge in a better world.
I agree.
The
Absolutely.
immediate concern is nuclear war. To me, that is.
I agree.
And I think probably we're all on the same page here. That the risk of this happening is escalating, and as I think Lawrence Wilkerson observed, we are probably in a more dangerous place from the perspective of nuclear war than we've ever been in the nuclear era.
I agree completely.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially with the orientation towards the weaponization of space, which we could see sort of the current moving in that direction as well, is only lending itself even more loudly to your point that this is the first time in human history that we've ever been able to wield such power of ending world hunger and poverty with the power of the atom. You could do so much. You could green deserts, but you could also self-destruct and annihilate nature forever as well as human beings. That's another possibility. So it really comes down to the moral imperative of what types of values we will wish to voluntarily not impose, but just adopt as a society that will use this sort of power for good or for evil. I would be, I think, wrong to close out today's conversation without some discussion about tariffs, because that was the original thing that we put out to announce today's roundtable or today's discussion was the question of what is the strategy behind Trump's tariff policy. I know, Marty, you and I guess I'm not sure about Dimitri's position. We're very pro-tariff. However, I'm also not ignorant, and I know neither are you, Marty, to the fact that tariffs can also be weaponized and abused, as the British Empire in the 19th century used tariffs for themselves, but they didn't allow their victim colonies around the world to use tariffs for themselves. So good for me, but not for thee, in order to flood the markets and keep these nations underdeveloped, economically constrained. And so my concern right now is that what's happening right now with, there's various deals that the U.S. has made between South Korea, Japan, the EU. Tariffs are making a big comeback. I'm wondering, is this a positive development, or do you see this as more duplicitous, Marty? And then I want to get Dimitri's thoughts on the same thing too.
Actually, I'm looking forward to Dimitri's thoughts because I need them. Because, again, the same contradiction and complexity with Trump. It's both. I'm fully in favor. I have a friend, or he might be a very interesting interlocutor for us to have on this show. He's a passionate British patriot, a former Rothschild banker, but he hates Keynesianism, he hates one worldism, he hates the unlimited free trade and open borders. A very interesting man called Martin Hutchinson, economic analyst in Britain. And he makes the point that tariffs are essential to protect domestic industries and economies in prosperity. He's very much an economic nationalist man. His great hero in this, as is mine, is Otto von Bismarck. And the Zollverein in Germany, the German customs union through the 19th century, which was totally constructive. But he makes the point that there's a limit of, once you go above 20% in tariffs, he says they usually become counterproductive. Even then, they may not be. A president he admires, and I admire greatly too, William McKinley, raised tariffs when he was still in Congress, the McKinley tariff of the early 1890s, on some major industrial production goods and raw materials to 50%, and the American economy still boomed. But the Smoot-Hawley tariff, of course, anything Herbert Hoover touched was a catastrophe, and it backfired. We see with Trump both these factors. To this day, it is an article of faith among in the American mainstream media that America is going to have out of control inflation and economic collapse because of the Trump tariffs. It's a big lie. The opposite has happened. All the American data, and there's a very good American analyst, economic analyst, I don't think shares most of our views, but he's a very solid, meticulous guy called Alan Tonelson, Tonelson. He tracks the official figures, as which appear to be as accurately as one can come to this. And he points out this is a dog that didn't bark in the night. The American economy is not collapsing. Although the American financial industry and federal government are in terrible shape, and Trump refuses to raise a fingernail to cut the defense budget, which is an inconceivable scandal. Nevertheless, there are tens of billions of dollars every month now flowing in from tariff revenues that were not there before. And the worst inflation in 45 years, which came under Biden, which he and his people were never criticized for a second, has been broken and tamed. With all the problems in the American economy, it's in far better shape because of the tariff policies than it was before them. And they are not wrecking the Europeans and the Brits either, despite all the childish wails of, oh, how can you, after they've lived off taking advantage of American markets hypocritically for so long, the British and the French and the Germans whine about this. But on the one hand, this is positive. And by and large, I would say sanctions are always a catastrophe. They always fail. They always backfire. Tariffs, by contrast, tend to work in moderation extremely well. They raise the standard of living. They encourage domestic industry. They are essential for economic nationalism on a successful scale within nations and within coherent economic areas. And Trump does recognize this. But of course, Trump cannot resist the MAGA delusion again of using tariffs as well as sanctions to try and break Iran, break even India, which is insane. Used against China, which is totally suicidal, given that China is what the United States was for 100 years and 150 years, the great key swing defining industrial dominant power in the world. It's been there for 25 years now, and no American wants to admit it. Most of the Europeans don't either. But you have to deal with the reality of China and deal with it constructively and engage them. So Trump is perfectly capable of bungling tariffs, and we've seen signs he does so in many areas. But fundamentally, he's done a surprising amount of good on tariffs, certainly in the first administration, and even more so in the second one, that, of course, he has never given credit in the liberal mainstream media for. You think The Economist in London will admit this for a second, or the New York Times or the Washington Post? Hell no.
So I guess in my evaluation of American tariff policy and history is that when done well, it has tended to benefit all parties involved. You have reciprocity, you got various deals made between countries, but that both countries benefit, and the financier power lording above nations tends to have to submit itself to the will and benefits of both participating nations. Right now, I'm not convinced so far when I look at the details of the types of treaties reached or the deals reached between the U.S. and Japan and the U.S. and South Korea, that it's really benefiting the Japanese people or the Japanese economy or the South Korean people or the South Korean economy. It seems like they're possibly getting hurt in favor of these big multinationals like Monsanto and Amazon and others who have an immense amount of access, where the U.S. goods coming in to those countries aren't getting tariffed. They get to have this stuff put onto them, but their regulation that protects them from Amazon and from Monsanto and other things is being taken down. So, Dimitry, in your mind, do you see any positivity, or do you see this as a dishonest or more destructive policy towards these countries? Or I didn't bring up Europe or Canada, but I could have.
I think, well, let's from a big picture, I don't think any nation can be truly free and sovereign unless it is self-sufficient economically. And I think tariffs are an entirely legitimate form of ensuring economic self-sufficiency and preserving the sovereignty of a nation. They always have been and always will be, but they have to be well designed, and they can't be perverted for counterproductive hegemonic purposes. So let's look at some of the things that Donald Trump has done with tariffs. I think he either slapped Brazil with tariffs or threatened to stick them with additional tariffs because of the prosecution of Bolsonaro. I mean, this is absurd. He's interfering in the domestic politics and the legal system of a sovereign nation by threatening them with tariffs. Recently, the Carney government here in Kent, well, not where I am now, but I'm a Canadian citizen, so I pay close attention. Carney came out and announced, because of the famine in Gaza, that he was going to recognize Palestine, which is a completely ineffectual measure, by the way, to deal with the problem of famine. Completely, it's utter kabuki theater. But despite that fact, it was not going to impose any meaningful constraint on Israel's freedom of action in Gaza. Trump threatened Canada with tariffs because it was going to, he was talking about, recognizing the state of Palestine. It's absurd. So that's one thing. Trump is using them in a number of instances, not all, certainly in some instances. I get why he's done it, and I think it's good for the American people potentially. But he's also done it for the wrong reasons. And the other thing is, they're not in and of themselves sufficient. So if he wants to reindustrialize, there has going to have to be, in selected segments of the economy, state intervention. There's going to have to be investment by the state. You can't rely. The United States, in some segments of its economy, has become so deindustrialized, and the removal of industrial facilities offshore has become so entrenched in the supply chains and so forth that you're going to have to do more than impose tariffs in order to reindustrialize that segment of the economy. And Donald Trump doesn't seem remotely interested in doing that sort of thing. And in fact, by decreasing taxes and increasing military spending, he is diminishing the fiscal capacity of the United States government to make the necessary investments in developing these economic sectors. So I think it's ultimately his approach to tariffs is a dog's breakfast. In principle, they can be a very good thing, but I think he's a long way away from having designed these tariffs in a way that is going to maximize benefits for the American people.
Yeah, that's fair. And I really hope that this can change. But as the old saying goes, where there is no vision, the people perish. And I noticed that where tariffs have been done well in American history, or where they are being done well in today's world, it's where there is a vision of something like the Belt and Road Initiative, like the Transcontinental Railway of the 19th century. You had a concept of a better future that was tied to a philosophy of ensuring that the economy serves the well-being of the people, as well as other neighbors that are not your country, but that should also benefit from the fruits of freedom, of technological and scientific progress. And when that philosophy and when the practical aspect of that in the form of concrete plans was made manifest, protective tariffs served a wonderfully important, vital role, as we've seen again with China's ability to rise and just destroy so much poverty in the past 30 years. It couldn't have been done were there not concrete measures that were undertaken to organize the economy and its priorities, and the private and public sector's cooperation in manifesting something that was legit. And the use of protective tariffs was solid. In this case, I am disturbed to see this absence of vision, except for maybe piecemeal venture capital, initiatives being put forth instead of the nation state playing a role within the U.S. governing class, except in the military. There it's okay. There you can have a vision to build up, a golden dome. Fine. Okay. But what about the things that benefit people? Absolutely. Guys, we've reached a little bit past the top of the hour. We hit some really big topics, and honestly, from what we just touched upon, any number of these topics can be pulled on and unpacked. And I like what we did today as far as building a thumbnail sketch, keeping it flexible. There are points, as Dimitry said, of optimism that humanity has exhibited in a more of problem solving times of crisis. That power itself more and more loudly in the western part of the basket case world we're having to be living at the moment. To see more of that. But said, there are ground. We are very aware that there are some toxic, sick, dangerous ideas that have been permitted to run rampant for a long time and that haven't been dealt with in any way. So that could also spell disaster for humanity. Let me throw final thoughts from both of you guys as far as a few weeks ahead, a few weeks forward. Do you have any positive messages for the people, Marty?
Possibly for the same reasons that you and Dimitry have both rightly said, Matt, and that is there can be positive moves ahead. The very contradictions and confusions in the president's mind and in his policies, at least in which some constructive things can happen. It's feasible that we can end the killing in Ukraine. It is feasible that we can stop the killing in Gaza. This can happen. If the president has a long-established personal chemistry with the president of Russia, that's not the problem. The problem is he will listen to the president of Russia. He will be very positive to him. But once he comes back, he's very swayable. Will he again listen to the last man who speaks to him? Will he be easily veered or pressured, or most of all, subtly persuaded? Of course. As you have both rightly said, and again, alas, I fully agree with you both, there are major forces out there that have not given up on these mad, insane dreams on Eurasia, of splintering Russia, of destabilizing China, of not seeking coexistence in the world. There is a very wise, eminent scholar I know who was a former commandant of the U.S. Naval Institute in Annapolis. And he said the essence of diplomacy and grand strategy is to preserve peace in the world. And if we have a situation where we're talking about the same issues 100 years from now, and the United States is still there, and Russia is still there, and China and Iran are still there, Israel, for that matter, is still there, and Britain, we will have succeeded. But there has to be a sense of genuine multipolarity and tolerance for this.
Absolutely.
That's my worry.
Marty, that was well said. Dimitry, I know that I just realized that you have to go for another meeting in about a minute. So thank you so much, both of you guys. And I really appreciate this discussion. Both links to both of your works, to Marty's books, to Dimitri's Substack, is going to be in the description box very shortly under this video. So check that out. Spread the word, like and subscribe. This is a brand new channel, so we're really trying to amplify and get the word out that this is a place where these types of big ideas are being discussed, and giving people, our focus is obviously solutions. So that's something we need all the people watching right now to help out with, to spread it to your networks and social media and everything else. Again, Dimitry, Marty, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time for another episode of Pluralia Dialogue.
Great discussion today with Matt Ehret's efforts to really create some dialogue in regards to what's happening, geopolitical, geoeconomic. And I'm glad that he takes the time to allow for dialogue among ideas that are presented by commentators. I think it's important right now to understand that there's a lot of commentary, there's a lot of analysis that's taking place in regards to what's happening. Although no one has a crystal ball to foretell the future of what's happening, it's important to take in different information, different ideas from commentators. But at the same time, my belief is that when commentators come out and they come up with their analysis, hopefully they've taken the time to evaluate and defend their position. And my point is that, like, through conversation, is that when someone presents an idea to me that seems pretty far-fetched or perhaps disconnected from what I think is the realization, that I think it's important through these conversations we're having them to ask the questions, can they validate the information that they're providing? In other words, give me some pure examples of your analysis of the information that you're presenting. So that way we can take what is perception versus reality, even though there's a small variance of what that is, because sometimes our perceptions leads to our realities. But at the same time, we're living through a situation that's very different than history has presented us. History may rhyme, but it may not always repeat. But I think there are certain things that are happening within the United States, within the world, that are just too important right now to really, we have to have a filter in regards to what information that we're intaking, And for me personally, in my own personal position, that I don't have time anymore for commentary that is not well researched, or they've taken the time to validate their position. And I would love to participate in those spaces or channels that open up for people to push back on the commentary of what's presented. As an interviewer, as a person that's hosting a live stream, I think it's up to that person individually to really push back on that person. Like if they present an idea, not to just pivot to the other, and you have to like challenge that person, like, please validate to me if you're saying that these efforts are putting forth more of a peace position. Give me some examples, like give me some real examples of what that looks like and what's happening. So there's so many different information channels that we can get from nowadays, whether it's the legacy news channel, podcasts, X streams, or X spaces. There's so many different venues we can get it from, and I think that's great. But as citizens, as informed citizens, we have to do our job to really research and understand and form our own positions. And at the same time, whenever we hear something that is either in line to our belief system or different, is to be open to those ideas. But at the same time, those presenters should validate their information that's being presented. So I want to thank Matt Ehret for his efforts. He's on several different platforms. Matt has a brilliant mind. I will always be very supportive of his work, his dialogues, his interviews, and everything that he does. So this is CJ, just with an OMC simulcast of what Matt presented today. And I'm not sure where we're going to go from here. I may jump in and do more. I think at this time, day and age, that I think that you have to have that level of voice that's going to be out there and presenting information more from an open perspective. And I hope that you tune in and listen. So you can follow me at CJ over on Facebook, and then also on X Spaces, OMC simulcast. So everyone have a great, it's 12 o'clock here in Indiana on Sunday afternoon. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Disconnect, go spend time with your family, friends, and enjoy life. Peace and love. Take care. Bye-bye.